Hey, what's up guys? Brian Kelly here from Zombie Guitar. Here in today's video, we're going to be talking about key changes. So there's going to be 9 different examples in this video, and within these 9 examples, we're either going to be moving from major keys to minor keys, or from a minor key to a major key, or from a major key to a different major key, or a minor key to a different minor key. So as we go through these 9 examples, I'm going to be giving you various different concepts along the way to help you to smoothly transition from one key to the next. So the idea is we're going to be starting out playing a chord progression in just one single key. All the chords are all going to be part of one single key. We're then going to be transitioning to another key, whole new set of chords, whole new set of notes, entirely different key altogether. So in order to get from point A, which is your first key, to point B, which is your second key, you're always going to have options. There's always going to be options, and that's kind of where the art in this whole, writing music, writing chord progressions, modulating keys, it's an art form. So you're always going to have options. So one of your options is to, you can just abruptly make the change. So you could just be playing your original chord progression, and then when the key change time comes, you need to switch to the key. Don't worry about transitional chords. Don't worry about any fancy concepts or anything like that. Just make the key change. There's nothing wrong with that. We're going to give examples of that in this video. You hear, abrupt key changes in popular music all the time. It sounds good. It, adds interest to the song. It shocks the listener. Nothing wrong with abrupt key changes. You also have the option to make smooth key changes. So you're playing your chord progression in your original key. You want to get to your new key, but you use some transitional chords to help you transition from point A to point B, or vice versa. And that's what some of these concepts that we're going to be talking about in this video are going to be about. So this first example is extremely important to understand as far as the concept goes, but I wouldn't necessarily call this a key change because we're starting out in the key of C major, we're then moving to the key of A minor, we're then moving back to the key of C major. So we're remaining 100% in the same key signature. So even though it's C major and A minor, it's still the same key signature. What a key signature means is that it has the same the relative major-minor pair. It shares all the same stuff. The C major scale, the 7 notes of the C major scale are exactly the same as the 7 notes of the A natural minor scale. If you want to look at the reduced 5-note scale, otherwise known as the pentatonic scale, the C major pentatonic scale has the exact same 5 notes as the A minor pentatonic scale. Same stuff. If you want to look at the chords that are found in this particular key signature, any given key signature has 3 major chords and 3 minor chords in it. There's 12 key signatures in total. This particular key signature, C major / A minor, the 3 major and 3 minor chords, you can always figure it out by looking at your circle of fifths, looking at the grouping of 6. So looking at the grouping of 6 here, these are your 3 major and 3 minor chords found for this particular key signature. The only difference between major versus minor within a key signature is looking at your center chords within your grouping of 6 on your circle of fifths. The outer circle center chord, you treat that chord as your tonal center, it's a major key. Center chord inner circle, you treat that as your tonal center, it's a minor key. That's all there is to it. That's the difference between a major key and a minor key within the same key signature. Alright, so example 2 is going to be moving from C major to C minor. So these are 2 different key signatures now. So we're starting out in the key signature of C major, which has these chords available, 3 major and 3 minor in the grouping of 6 on the circle of fifths, we're then moving to the key signature of C minor. These 3 major and these 3 minor chords can be found in the key signature of C minor. The relative major name of the C minor key would be E flat. So E flat is the major name of that key. C minor is the minor name of that key. Just like C major and A minor were a relative major-minor pair, E flat major and C minor is another relative major-minor pair. So we're moving from one key signature to the next key signature. So my pentatonic position number 1 for the first key signature, C major, is going to be found between frets 5 and 8, like it was for the first example, using my pinky to locate my scale root, my major scale root, pinky major scale root right there, note C on the 8th fret. There's my C major pentatonic position number 1. And then when I move to the new key of C minor, my pentatonic position number 1 is going to shift up to here between frets 8 and 11. All right, so I'm taking my first finger, putting it on the note C, because it's C minor now. First finger is minor, so C minor. Pinky happens to fall right there on the 11th fret. That's the note E flat, so C minor, E flat major. So that my new solo box will be here. So at this point, I want to talk about the most important transitional chord that you could possibly know about, and that's called the dominant chord. So I used a dominant chord to get me back from the C minor key back to the C major key. So a dominant chord is simply just a fifth above the next chord. So how do you know what a fifth is? Well, you can use your circle of fifths. The circle of fifths takes all of the notes. You can look at the outer circle of the circle of fifths and just treat them as notes instead of treating them as chords. And when you move in the clockwise direction, all of the notes move a fifth. So you're starting on C. A fifth above C is G. A fifth above G is D. A fifth above D is A. So the circle of fifths moves in fifths. So if my goal is to get to C, I have to ideally play a chord that's a fifth above C. So how do I know what a fifth above C is? Well, I just look at my circle of fifths. I find my C, I find the chord right to the clockwise direction, that's the G. So G is going to be the dominant chord that pulls me back to C. So when you're using a dominant chord will lead you back to either a major chord or a minor chord. So I can use the G chord to get me back to a C major chord, or I can use the G chord to get me to a C minor chord. So when we started out in the key signature of C major, and then transitioned to the key of C minor, that worked perfectly because the chord progression went C to F to G, and then it switched to the C minor. So that G was already there, so I didn't have to worry about any transitional chords or anything like that. But when I wanted to get back out of C minor back into C major, I just threw in a transitional chord there. I threw in a G because that's that dominant chord. That's that fifth of C. So when I was here, so I threw that G in there. So that's how dominant chords work. Dominant chord is a fifth above the chord that it's moving to next. So I just played a major chord there, but you can also play a dominant seventh chord if you want to play it in its seventh form version. So instead of playing a G major, I could have played a G7, and that always works. Anytime you're playing dominant chords, if you want to just play the triad form, it's going to be a major chord. If you want to play it in its seventh form, which contains 4 notes, you would play a dominant seventh chord. Not a major seventh chord, not a minor seventh chord, it's a dominant seventh chord. So if I wanted to throw a G7 in there, that would have been fine too. So I used a G dominant 7 instead of a G major chord, and that's fine. Just understand that's a dominant chord function. Dominant chord function is a fifth above the next chord that it's trying to move to. You're going to see that being used throughout the rest of this video. Very important concept to understand. So that example there was two seemingly abrupt key changes, moving from the key of A minor, moving to the key of C minor, and then back to A minor, with no transitional chords. So why did that work? Why did I not need transitional chords? Why did both key changes seem to flow into one another so nicely? Well, we already know that moving from the key of A minor to the key of C minor, the chord progression that I used was A minor, F, G. So that G transitions nicely into C minor because G is a fifth above C. Therefore, G functions as a dominant chord in relation to the C minor chord. So it takes me to that C minor chord nicely. But then getting back to the original key, getting back to that key of A minor, so getting from that B flat, that sounds nice, right? And the reason is because it's known as a tritone substitution of the dominant chord that would be a dominant to the A minor chord, if that makes sense. So, dominant chord of an A is what? How do you know what the dominant chord of an A is? You look at your circle of fifths, you find your A, you find the chord that's one clockwise direction, so E. So E is your dominant chord in relation to A. So if I play an E major chord, E major is going to sound great coming right before A minor. E dominant 7 chord. Again, E dominant 7 chord sounds great moving to the A minor chord. You could also play an E chord moving to an A major chord, or E dominant 7. So E is the dominant chord in relation to A. But if I was to just throw that E in there from the key of C minor, it's too random, all right? So I don't like the sounds of that. So although E moves me back to A nicely, getting from C minor to that E, that didn't sound too good. But B flat, leaving the B flat, that B flat chord to the A minor chord, that did sound good. It sounded just as good, and that's because it's called a tritone substitution. So for any chord, you always have one other chord that's going to function the exact same way, and that's called a tritone substitution. So if the goal is to get you back to A, E is your dominant chord. If you find that E doesn't work in the particular scenario that you happen to find yourself in, like this one, try the tritone substitution, see if that one works. The tritone substitution can always be found by looking at your circle of fifths and going directly across. So directly across from E on the circle of fifths is B flat. So since E didn't seem to work in this particular scenario, because playing in the key of C minor and then throwing in that random E, that was too abrupt. But playing the key of C minor and then using, the B flat chord, that B flat chord functions exactly the same way as an E major chord. So I'm not going to get into why tritone substitutions work. I have another lesson about tritone substitutions. I'll post a link to that below if you want to check that out. Just understand that for any dominant chord, or for any chord for that matter, there's one tritone substitution. So the reason I'm going to A major is because if you look at the original key, C major, if you view that from its minor perspective, which is A minor, you can then move to the parallel key of A minor, which would be A major. So just like C major and then C minor That's a parallel key change. You could also say A minor to A major is a parallel key change. Except the original starting key that we're starting out at is C major, not A minor, C major. It's the same key signature, so it really doesn't make a difference. But that's why I'm moving to A major. So C major moving to A major. My soloing boxes, my first soloing box for the key of C major. Major means pinky. You find your note C. There it is on the 8th fret. So there's my C major pentatonic between frets 5 and 8. And then when I move to a major, pinky, so put your pinky on the note A right there, 5th fret. There's your pentatonic box between frets 2 and 5. So here's a major pentatonic box. Alright, so that didn't sound too bad, but it was an abrupt key change going both ways. So going from the C major key to the A major key, it was abrupt. And then going back to C major, it was also abrupt. So let's try to throw in a transitional chord there. So instead of C, F, G, C, F, G, the second time around it's going to be C, F, G, then C, F, G, and then I'm going to throw an E in there. So why am I throwing an E in there? Because E is the dominant chord in relation to A. You can verify this by looking at your circle of fifths. Find your A, that's where I'm trying to get to. So 1 in the clockwise direction is your E. So I'm going to throw an E chord or an E dominant 7 chord, either one E major or E dominant 7, and that's going to lead me into my A major key a bit nicer. So let's hear how that sounds. So as you can see, that kind of smoothed things out a little bit, but then getting back to C, again, it didn't sound horrible, but it could have sounded better. So again, let's use a transitional chord. What transitional chord is going to get me back to C? Well, you just use your circle of fifths. You find your C on the circle of fifths. 1 in the clockwise direction is the G. So right at the very end of the A major part, I'm just going to throw a G chord in there, and that's going to help me get back to the original progression. Alright, so you see that throwing those dominant chords in there, throwing in that E major chord right before the A, that seemed to help me get to the A key signature. And then throwing in that G chord right before the C, that helped me get back into the key of C major. And again, if I wanted to play an E7 in place of that E major, that's fine. If I wanted to play a G7, otherwise known as a G dominant 7, in place of the G major, that's fine too. That's a transitional chord. It helps you get back to the new key. Alright, so we started out in C major, we then moved to the key of E major. We then moved back to the key of C major. So that was we did so by doing abrupt key changes. We didn't use any transitional chords. And, maybe you thought that sounded good. Maybe you didn't. Let your ear be the guide. Your ear is always the ultimate guide. It's up to you. For the purpose of this video, we're just going to try and smooth things out a bit. And we're going to use some transitional chords. So now, instead of just using one single transitional chord, which is the dominant chord, which is the fifth of the chord that you're moving to, we're now going to be using two chords. We're going to be using 2, 5, 1. I'm sure you've heard this before if you've been into music theory or you've been, into jazz or whatever. You've definitely heard of a 2, 5, 1. So a 2, 5, 1, all it is just a way to get from one key signature to another key signature smoothly. That's it. So far we've been doing 5, 1. When we throw in a dominant chord and then move to the chord that's a fifth below it, that's a 5, 1. Now we're just throwing in a 2 before the 5, 1. So that's all there is to it. It's very, very simple. So how do you know what your 2 and your 5 and your 1 are and all that stuff? Well, your 1 is where you're trying to get to. All right. So we started out in the key of C major. We're trying to get to the key of E major. So E is 1. All right. We already know what our 5 is. So 5 is always going to be the chord that's one clockwise position in relation to the chord that we're trying to get to. So clockwise in relation to E is B. So B is 5, E is 1. So now we just got to find our 2. So within your grouping of 6 on your circle of fifths, we're in the key signature of E major right now. You have your grouping of 6 right here. You have your 3 major and 3 minor chords. You can always just label these chords 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. And it's always going to be the same within the grouping of 6, no matter which key signature you're in. So outer circle center position is always going to be 1. Inner circle counterclockwise is always going to be 2. Inner circle clockwise is always going to be 3. Outer circle counterclockwise is always going to be 4. Outer circle clockwise is going to be 5. Inner circle center position is always going to be 6. And then inner circle center position is the minor name of the key signature. So E major is the major name of this key signature. C sharp minor is the minor name of this key signature. Just kind of a review of what we've talked about already. But based on the positioning within the grouping of 6, you know where your 2 is, you know where your 5 is, and you know where your 1 is. So in this key signature, your 2 is F sharp minor. Your 5 is B major. Of course, you can make that into a B dominant 7 chord if you want. And then your 1 is E. So as I'm moving from the C major key, my goal is to get to E. So rather than just jumping straight to the E, I could throw a B beforehand. Or B7, that's the 5. Or to make it even smoother, I could throw an F sharp minor, and then a B, and then an E, making it a 2, 5, 1. And that's all there is to it. So we can do that, getting us from C major to E major. And then when you want to get back from E major back to C major, again, we can do another 2, 5, 1. So the 2, 5, and 1 are all going to take place in the key signature that we're trying to get to. So getting from the key signature of E major, trying to get to the key signature of C major. C would now be the 1. 5 in relation to C would be G, or we could play a G dominant 7 chord, G7 chord, and then a 2 within that key signature would be D minor. So instead of just abruptly going from C major key to E major key and then back, we're throwing in a 2, 5, 1 and then throwing in another 2, 5, 1 to help us transition from key to key. So check that out. So my pentatonic position number 1 for the starting key was right here between frets 5 and 8. pinky for major. C major was my starting key, so pinky goes on the note C, 8th fret. So there's my pentatonic position number 1 for the C major pentatonic. And then for the next key, which was E major, that fell between frets 9 and 12. Again, major, E major, pinky is major, goes on the note E. There's my pentatonic position number 1 for that key signature. When I was doing those 2-5-1s, I was also kind of highlighting that with my lead playing. So just slightly, I was just playing, when it came to the 2-5-1, the F sharp minor to the B major to the E major, I was just playing an F sharp note to a B note to an E note. So I was going. So I was just kind of highlighting the chords with my lead playing. So that's all I was doing there. And then when I transitioned back to the C, the 2-5-1 there was a D minor to a G major to a C major. So I was just playing the note D to the note G to the note C. So I went. So that's all that was. I was just throwing that little bit of just kind of following the chord progression with my leads. Nothing fancy, just doing that, just to kind of outline the 2-5-1. So for the final example here, I'm going to stick with the C major key, moving to the E major key, and then back to C major. But let's assume that I wasn't a big fan of, the abrupt change from one key to the next, and I wasn't a big fan of the 2-5-1 changes. So maybe you are, maybe you like those changes. If you do, great, go with them. Let your ear be the guide. Me personally, I didn't really like either of those changes all that much, so I'm going to try something else. I still want to start in C major. I then want to move to E major, and then I want to get back to C major. So I still have the same goal. I just want to try something else to get me from point A to point B, and then back to point A. So I'm going to do a tritone substitution again. So I'm starting out in the key of C major. I'm moving to the key of E major. My goal is to get to E major. So E is the 1. How do I get to a 1? I don't have to, but I could use a dominant chord to help me lead me back to the 1. So what's the dominant chord in relation to E? Look at your circle of fifths. 1 in the clockwise position in relation to E is the B. So I could use a B chord to help me get to E. I could use a B7 chord to help me get to E. B major or B7, either one will get me back to E, right? So I could also use a tritone substitution, just like we talked about in a previous example. So instead of using a B, there's one other chord that will function the same way, that will lead me back to that E, that one other chord aside from the B. And that one other chord is the tritone substitution. That chord is found directly on the opposite side of the circle of fifths. That chord is F. All right, so the tritone substitution for B is F. So instead of using a B or a B7 to get me back to E, I could use an F or an F7 to get me back to E. And that's exactly what I'm going to do. And then once I'm in this new key signature of E major, and then I want to get back to the starting key signature of C major, I'm just going to go ahead and I'm just going to throw in a G major chord there. G major chord is the dominant chord in relation to C. G is the fifth of C, as you can see on your circle of fifths. So I'm going to do that. So I'm not going to do abrupt key changes. I'm not going to do these 2-5-1s. I'm going to do a tritone substitution, getting me to E major. And then I'm just going to throw in a dominant chord to get me back to the original starting key. Let's hear how that sounds. And I think that sounds pretty good. So the reason I like that tritone substitution right there is because, F, that F chord, it just so happened to already be part of the starting key signature. So I was in the key signature of C major trying to move to the key signature of E major, and I had determined that the F major chord would be a nice chord to get me there. And coincidentally, the F major chord just happened to be part of the starting key signature, so that made my life a lot easier. So throwing in that F major chord right before the E, it sounded great. I could have used an F dominant 7 chord in place of an F chord. That would have been fine too. The thing is, the tritone substitution, it just worked very, very nicely in this particular scenario because it was part of the original key, and it led very nicely into the key that I was trying to get to. And then when I wanted to get from E major back to C major, just throwing in that G there, that just seemed to work very nicely as well. You know, my ear said it was good. Theory or no theory, whatever, my ear liked it. So that out of the 3 examples of the C major to E major, this final one was my favorite. My ear is telling me, okay, that's the one to go with. That's what I'm going with. All right. So, yeah, so hopefully you guys got some ideas from this video. Hopefully you learned how to transition from one key to the next, you know, using tritone substitutions, dominant chords, 2-5-1s, stuff like that. So you have the whole palette of music. You have all the major chords, you have all the minor chords, you have all the 7th chords, all the major 7th chords. You have all the chords, you know, just get creative with it. And that's kind of what this video is about. Hope you guys enjoyed it. I'll see you next time. Thanks for watching.